Falling Awake is a series of psychological and philosophical films set inside both the dream worlds and realities of the characters inside its universe. This is a short film about how it all began, but first we have to rewind back a few years, all the way back to the summer of 2013. In the summer of 2013, I bought an iPhone. My first iPhone, and I was actually really impressed with the camera quality, especially the iPhone's ability to shoot in low light. Here we are in the woods at a campfire, just making music. Back then we were called the Yuppies. I shot a lot of film. This is Aguirre. You might recognize him as Vincent the Traveler in the first film. He would later reprise his role as Vincent Langley in the series. I've always liked telling stories. This is my first film that I did back in high school, about Detective Charles Montgomery. We eventually got a better camera, a Canon XL1, and shot the sequel to Charles Montgomery. This one was called Nightfall. I learned a lot more about cinematography and setting up scenes. In 2006, I filmed The American Romantic. I wouldn't finish this film until 2007. This was my first serious film. I explored a darker story, a darker character, and symbolism, which is prevalent in Falling Awake. In this scene, Thomas Crow is literally bearing his life. I wouldn't explore anything darker like this until Falling Awake. So in August of 2013, Aguirre and I wanted to collab on something. So I told him, come over to my house, I'll call up Kyle, wear something vintage, and we'll start shooting shots. So that's what we did. We went into the woods and we started just setting up shots and shooting them. Now Nero's character didn't have a name yet. It wouldn't be till later he would be called Vincent. Now, I'll get a lot of questions about him being shirtless. He did have a shirt, but it was summer and he began sweating profusely, so he changed it out of the sake of continuity. I can't stress enough that there was no story. There was no idea of what this was going to be. At most, it was going to be something 5 minutes with some interesting shots. It wasn't till months later that everything would change. So in September of 2013, I packed my bags and left Texas, along with my computer and my hard drive with all the scenes we filmed back in August. And then arrived in Washington, D.C. And every day on my commute, I took the metro, along with a journal in which I wrote down every scene and broke them down and tried to make a story out of them. It was going to be poetic, dark, and twisted. And so, after a week of writing and breaking it down, I felt I finally had the idea for what Falling Awake would eventually be. On October 1st, 2013, the United States government shut down. With no reason to go into D.C., I stayed home, took jogs, and thought about that story, and that I would narrate it, and I would name the character Vincent, and he would be asleep, and with these composited shots, I started stitching them together. And I moved these scenes around so they flowed. Everything would finally come together. And it wasn't until around November that I had the first draft of this film cut. The first cut of the film was finally done, except for one thing: the music. It wouldn't be until I got on a plane at Reagan National and flew back home to Texas that I would finally write the score to Falling Awake. So in December of 2013, I sat down with all my instruments and started composing the music.
As the birds sing and the winds whine,
And with everything together, the film was finally done.
a traveler Vincent travels to a place he hopes he can find.
And I premiered the film in January of 2014. But this was by no means the end of Falling Awake. In August of 2014, 8 months after I finished Falling Awake, I wanted to make another film. So while waiting for some girls to arrive, we shot a scene at a hotel in downtown San Antonio. This scene would inevitably be the screen test for Mitch Lyons as Marco St. Vincent in Falling Awake the series. It would also serve as a screen test for Clint Campbell, playing Charles Montgomery in this particular scene, to play Charles Montgomery in the series, starting in Chapter 3. However, this scene would not be fruitful in the end. This short, entitled Midnight Blues, would be the only short we filmed for Charles Montgomery, which was supposed to be a screen test for an upcoming film. But I liked Mitch Lyons' performance in this scene so much that I did write a sequel to Falling Awake. It was originally called Falling Awake 2, Marco St. Vincent.
Before I was alive, I was dead. Before I was dead, I was asleep. Before I was asleep, I fell awake.
I liked the trailer so much, I transformed the original film to fit this new feel. But we would never get to finish Falling Awake 2. Instead, we turned it into a web series.
Like that, I'll do a little look and then like that. Yeah, and action.
Shooting began exactly 2 years after we started filming the first Falling Awake in August of 2015, starring Mitch Lyons as Marco St. Vincent. The pages on the table during this scene are actually pages from the script.
God, I keep hitting Miley Cyrus. Alright.
What I admired about Mitch was he was doing his own stunts, even crashing into things. But in the end, everything came together for Falling Awake the series. this series introduced darker twists and turns. It blended everything into the dream world, into the realities. With darker stories and darker characters yet to come, Falling Awake is surely not over.